They say a man's study is the truest window into his mind. But when archivists quietly unlocked the door of Billy Graham's private study, nestled off the main hallway of his Carolina home, they discovered something no one suspected would still be hidden after decades of world-shaping ministry. Behind a false panel concealed by decades of polished mahogany lay stacked crates, leather-bound journals, and an ornate wooden box stamped with a single word in Graham's flowing script: Covenant. What lay inside would rewrite key chapters of modern evangelical history and leave you utterly speechless. It all began when the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association commissioned a full digitization of Graham's papers. In the process, historian Karen Whitmore noticed curious damage to the study's woodwork, a faint line running along the bookshelf, invisible unless the morning light hit it just right. She mentioned it to longtime curator Mark Reynolds, who recalled rumors of Graham's habit of stashing sensitive correspondence in unlikely places. With institutional permission, the two of them removed the shelf's lowest panel, exposing a narrow cavity. Inside were three weathered crates, each secured by leather straps that had never been photographed, cataloged, or referenced in any existing inventory. The first crate contained what appeared to be notebooks, scores of thin volumes stamped with dates spanning from 1945 to 1953, years Graham spent crisscrossing war-ravaged Europe. Their covers bore no titles, only his distinctive initials, WBG. When Whitmore carefully opened the first book, she found handwritten sermon drafts detailing theological reflections far more critical of institutional religion than his published messages suggested. In one passage dated June 1947, Graham mused on the tension between spiritual revival and ecclesiastical bureaucracy. True faith transcends denominational walls. We must tear down those edifices if souls are to be saved. Such candid assessments hinted at a side of Graham's ministry rarely glimpsed by the public, an unvarnished call for unity that predated his famed stadium crusades. The second crate proved even more astonishing. Wrapped in oiled velvet pouches were dozens of sealed envelopes addressed to FDR and HSD, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Harry S. Truman. Inside each envelope lay private letters from Graham, sent during the closing chapters of World War II. In one undated note to President Truman, Graham urged immediate federal support for refugee programs in Europe, writing, "Our nation's moral leadership compels us to act, lest we bear the stain of indifference." These letters had never been publicly acknowledged or released, and their contents underscored the degree to which Graham's influence extended beyond the pulpit and into the corridors of power. The revelation raised pressing questions. Why were these appeals never made public? What roles did they play in shaping post-war policies? The third container was the smallest, but arguably the most breathtaking, an elaborately carved wooden box secured by a brass latch. Inside lay a single item, Graham's original handwritten outline for a global council of faith leaders, complete with names, meeting agendas, and even draft memoranda proposing locations and funding sources. He had championed the idea in 1950, but never realized it. This Council of Nations, as he called it, would have united Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox Christians, and even leaders from other faiths in a joint effort against nuclear proliferation and moral decay. The box included correspondence with Jorge Cardinal Montini, later Pope Paul VI, and private telegrams from Anglican and Methodist primates. These documents revealed a visionary plan for interfaith collaboration that Graham kept hidden, perhaps fearing controversy or institutional backlash. As word of the discovery spread among the research team, Whitmore and Reynolds realized they had stumbled onto an untold dimension of Graham's legacy, a behind-the-scenes architect of both religious unity and international policy. The study's secret trove raised immediate logistical and ethical dilemmas. Should these materials be released in full, or would that compromise ongoing relationships with religious institutions that had partnered with Graham over decades? Would revealing these letters force a reinterpretation of the 20th century's most enduring revivalist movement? And what personal pressures had led Graham himself to seal these items away in the first place? Before they could answer, they found yet another hidden compartment, this one above the fireplace mantel, containing a velvet-bound ledger titled Operative Mercy. Its pages documented confidential meetings between Graham and leading Cold War-era operatives, exploring faith-based initiatives aimed at countering Soviet atheistic propaganda. The entries, dated from 1952 to 1955, named CIA contacts and proposed covert funding channels for underground churches behind the Iron Curtain. This ledger suggested Graham's ministry had intersected directly with geopolitical strategies, blending evangelism with clandestine operations to an extent never previously documented. In that moment, the gravity of the find crystallized. Beneath the warm glow of desk lamps, surrounded by dust motes dancing in the Carolina twilight, Whitmore and Reynolds faced the vast implications of their unearthing. Here, in the hushed silence of Billy Graham's private study, lay hidden blueprints for global fellowship, pressed letters that could reshape diplomatic narratives, and strategies that blurred the line between faith and espionage. Their discovery promised to alter our understanding of both a man and a movement that had touched millions. As the final lock clicked shut on the hidden fireplace compartment, the weight of the discovery settled over the two historians. In the amber glow of the desk lamp's circle, they leafed through entries in the operative Mercy ledger, marveling at names they recognized from Cold War history texts. One entry detailed a clandestine meeting in Vienna with a high-ranking Eastern European cleric, planning secret seminaries funded via seemingly innocuous missionary budgets. Another notation described covert drops of Bibles and theological pamphlets at Warsaw train stations, financed through front companies set up in Oslo and Zurich. The documents hinted mysteries. They sat in silence before the ledger, aware that each line could reshape understanding of how faith and geopolitics mingled. As curator, Mark had never seen covert operations within a ministry. Karen called a colleague at the National Archives to request access to related cables. Consultants in theological ethics were summoned to discuss implications of revealing the Council of Nations proposal. If these documents reached the public unfiltered, they might spark contentious debates within denominations and diplomatic circles. Every step forward required carefully weighing historical accuracy against possible harm to institutional relationships and Graham's carefully curated legacy. Process demanded urgency. Over the next week, the team uncovered additional caches behind bookcases and beneath the Persian rug. Journals spanning decades revealed Graham's private reflections on crises like the Cuban Missile Standoff and the Suez Embargo, passages never shared with pulpit audiences. One faded notebook held multi-page meditations on reconciling patriotism with prophetic rebuke, suggesting he had privately questioned U.S. policies before publicly aligning with them. Folded maps detailed routes for relief convoys to Buchenwald survivors, annotated with dates and transport codes. Fearing controversy, these aids had been hidden away after initial trials proved logistically complex. Each new discovery deepened questions' deeper context. By contrast, the box labeled Covenant revealed Graham's 30-page manifesto drafted in 1948 but never acknowledged publicly. Inside, he pledged to serve all sectors of society, regardless of creed or color. He envisioned convening leaders from faith traditions, government, and civil rights movements to forge common ground on issues from racial justice to nuclear disarmament. Photographs showed informal gatherings in Chicago's Chatham neighborhood, Graham seated among rabbis and imams. Scholars now view this covenant as a forgotten blueprint for spiritual diplomacy, anticipating initiatives later revived in global interfaith councils. Historians believe its principles influenced policy shifts during Cold War era. Meanwhile, the discovery rippled through academic and faith communities. Editors at major publishing houses signaled interest in new volumes, while journalists prepared features. The Graham Evangelistic Association convened a task force to evaluate materials, balancing transparency with stewardship. Synopses of Europe journals were shared with seminaries for scholarly review. Interfaith leaders praised the manifesto's vision of unity, despite criticism of its political recommendations. Yet the overall response was enthusiastic curiosity. The hidden trove illuminated Graham's behind-the-scenes strategies and opened avenues for dialogue across religious spheres. Plans emerged for a documentary series and a commemorative exhibit at the Museum of History. In private briefings, Graham's family debated publication. Some argued that revealing strategic collaborations risked overshadowing spiritual messages. Others believed transparency would honor his intent and inspire deeper scholarship. Ultimately, the BGA board agreed on a phased disclosure, published sermon notebooks with scholarly annotations, released diplomatic letters under archival embargo agreements, and curate an exhibit titled Hidden Covenant. Legal teams negotiated permissions with surviving correspondents and church bodies worldwide. Meanwhile, the curator team began digitizing audio tapes discovered alongside the crates, including Graham's unsent Christmas sermons recorded at his Asheville church. These recordings promised to shed light on his pastoral heart. As news of these revelations spread, reactions ranged from awe to deep reflection. Seminary professors revised curriculums to add case studies in faith and statecraft. Faith-based nonprofits examined Graham's plans for humanitarian aid, aiming to adapt them for modern crises. Debates flared in editorial pages over the ethics of clandestine church funding during the Cold War. Yet one point united observers. The archives offered a window into the mind of a man who guided millions worldwide. As the BGA readied a global symposium this spring to unveil these treasures, anticipation swelled for a new chapter in the Billy Graham story, one that promises to inspire, challenge, and redefine his enduring legacy. As the digitization team delved deeper, the personal diaries proved a treasure trove of convictions Billy Graham never voiced publicly. One leather-bound journal from 1954 chronicled his raw anguish over nuclear proliferation. "I pray the Lord spares our children from Armageddon," he wrote, reflecting a desperation at odds with his usual optimistic pulpit presence. In another entry, Graham detailed private discussions with racial justice leaders, praising their courage and lamenting white supremacy's grip on American churches. He even drafted an unbroadcast radio sermon decrying segregation as a sin, planning to premiere it in cities across the South, only to shelve it at the BGA's council, fearing backlash that might derail broader evangelistic campaigns. Alongside those writings, archivists uncovered a cache of reel-to-reel tapes labeled Heart to Heart. These recordings featured Graham's most intimate addresses, spoken only into a studio microphone and never released. In one December 1957 session, he confessed to tears shed in the Oval Office after urging President Eisenhower to consider the moral cost of nuclear testing. On another tape, recorded in a quiet church basement in Chicago, he rehearsed a sermon for the garbage collectors and factory workers ignored by mainstream media. His impassioned tone, unfiltered by broadcast standards, revealed a pastor determined to lift the overlooked and broken from despair. Internally, Graham's family and the BGA board grappled with how and when to share these materials. Some trustees argued that releasing the Civil Rights Journal too soon could ignite controversy in congregations unprepared for a frank reckoning with the past. Others believed that transparency would renew Graham's influence by showing his willingness to wrestle with moral complexity. Ethics advisors cautioned against exposing private moments that might be taken out of context, while historians emphasized the academic value of candid primary sources. Ultimately, the board commissioned an external review panel, comprising seminary professors, archivists, and interfaith leaders, to recommend a publication roadmap that balanced scholarship, pastoral sensitivity, and institutional integrity. Meanwhile, plans for the inaugural Hidden Covenant exhibit took shape. Curators sketched out immersive displays, a reconstructed section of Graham's study, complete with peeled-back panel and original crates, headphones offering synchronized playback of heart-to-heart snippets, interactive stations mapping the proposed Global Council of Nations. They envisioned inviting descendants of correspondents, family of FDR scholars, descendants of Eastern European clergy, even CIA historians, to provide on-site commentary. The exhibit would open at the Library of Congress before touring faith museums in London, Tokyo, and Johannesburg, allowing audiences worldwide to witness the hidden intersections of faith and policy that in parallel. Interfaith scholars seized upon Graham's unexecuted Council of Nations blueprint as a foundation for a modern initiative. Draft proposals circulated among Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Muslim, and Buddhist leaders, suggesting a biennial Graham Fellowship to address refugee crises, climate justice, and nuclear disarmament. A working group based in Geneva began drafting terms of reference, planning a soft launch that mirrored Graham's original vision. Small, informal gatherings prioritizing prayerful dialogue over political grandstanding. The aim was to honor Graham's forgotten concept while updating it for 21st century challenges. Perhaps the most astonishing find came in a sealed envelope marked Dr. King. Inside was a letter Graham wrote, but never mailed. A plea for Martin Luther King Jr. to preach at an upcoming crusade in Houston, underscoring Graham's respect for King's courage and his desire to unify evangelical and civil rights movements. Accompanying the letter was a carbon copy of King's draft reply, thanking Graham for the invitation but expressing concern over potential security risks. This missed connection illuminated two giants of mid-century faith who shared convictions yet were kept apart by circumstances, and raised the haunting question: what might have happened if their ministries had joined forces? The archivists and trustees face a pivotal decision. These revelations could reshape our understanding of Billy Graham, not merely as an evangelist on stadium stages, but as a visionary whose unpublicized efforts to bridge divides anticipated today's global interfaith collaborations. With the exhibit launch mere months away and publication plans in motion, one final secret remained locked in the study: an unmarked folder inscribed with Graham's own handwriting, labeled simply the Testament. What it contains is a revelation that promises to redefine both a ministry and a movement, where we'll reveal the contents of Graham's most personal declaration and the profound legacy it carries. They placed the unmarked folder on the oak desk, heartbeats thudding like war drums in the hush of the study. Its leather cover, softer than the crate's rough straps, bore only a single line in Graham's hand: the Testament. No date, no subtitle, just his name, as though the words inside formed his final message to the world. With gloved fingers, Karen pressed down on the folder's flap. It opened with a soft crack, as if awakening from decades of slumber. Inside lay a dozen loose sheets of creamy paper, each unfolded to reveal paragraphs of flowing script. The room's air thickened. Even the dust motes seemed to hold their breath. The first page began simply: "To those who seek truth beyond the roar of the crowd, may these words guide your heart." Beneath that invocation followed a sweeping confession. Graham spoke of his youthful zeal, the thrill of stadium crusades, and the roar of hundreds of thousands in awe. Yet he admitted that public applause sometimes drowned out the quiet stillness of conscience. He wrote of nights spent wrestling in prayer, questioning whether the message he preached had become bound to popularity instead of purity. "I have preached salvation," he confessed, "but at times feared my voice sought praise more than the one I proclaimed." As their eyes traced the next paragraphs, the historians found passages of startling vulnerability. Graham confessed a fear of failing his family, of neglecting his wife Ruth and their children as he chased global invitations. He lamented how the demands of ministry sometimes sent him tumbling from pulpit to plane, missing birthdays and anniversaries. A folded photograph fell out, a sepia-toned snapshot of Ruth tending a garden, Billy hovering in the background like a distant star. Beneath, in pencil, he'd scribbled, "Forgive me." The script wavered here, the ink smudged as if his hand trembled while writing. Turning the page, they discovered Graham's final theological reflections. He argued that faith must evolve. Institutional walls should not cage compassion. Creeds should not shackle charity. He urged a shift from crusade-style rallies to grassroots efforts of mercy, hospitality, and quiet service. In one striking passage he wrote, "The harvest is beyond stadium fields. It is the wounded neighbor at your doorstep, the refugee in the camp, the imprisoned soul yearning for light." These words echoed the hidden covenant manifesto but distilled it into a personal charge. Every believer must become a living testament to grace. Midway through the document, the tone deepened into visionary clarity. Graham outlined 3 core pillars for future ministry: unity across faiths, unflinching advocacy for social justice, and unsparing honesty in leadership. Against the backdrop of Cold War tensions and modern ideological divides, he envisioned a new generation of leaders who would speak truth to power, love without prejudice, and serve without self-regard. He proposed an annual gathering, smaller than stadium events, but richer in dialogue, a pilgrimage of peace, where participants would share stories of faltering faith and restored hope. The penultimate sheet contained perhaps the most dramatic revelation, a list of names, modern-day correspondents he hoped would carry forward his vision. Among them were pastors, civic leaders, even descendants of those wartime refugees he once aided. Each name was paired with a handwritten note. Pray for Hannah E. in Sarajevo. Visit the border shelters in Tijuana. Write to Pastor Kim in Seoul. These instructions felt like directives from beyond the grave, an operational blueprint for a new frontier of ministry. The specificity of the tasks underscored Graham's enduring commitment to hands-on service. The final page bore a simple blessing. May this testament find its way into compassionate hands, then multiply into 1,000 acts of mercy. My calling was to speak. Yours is to live. In that living, we become true disciples. The sheet ended with only his signature and a small cross drawn beneath it, as though marking the very center of his soul. The collective weight of those words settled in the room like a living presence, both a charge and an invitation. Silence reigned as Karen and Mark absorbed the gravity of Graham's last missive. They glanced at one another, eyes shining with the realization that the testament was more than private reflection. It was a clarion call for practical compassion, a final legacy he'd kept hidden until the moment it could be entrusted to the world. This was the revelation that would leave his legacy fundamentally transformed, not simply as an evangelist of mass gatherings, but as a mentor passing the baton of radical service. Following the unearthing of the Testament, the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association faced profound decisions about how to honor Graham's final wishes while stewarding sensitive material responsibly. Within days, a special advisory council formed, composed of seminary scholars, interfaith leaders, ethics professors, and members of Graham's own family. Carefully, they developed a three-tier release strategy. First, release the Testament as an annotated volume, accompanied by critical essays to contextualize Graham's reflections. Second, digitize and make public the Covenant Manifesto, sermon notebooks, and diplomatic letters under controlled archival conditions. And third, launch an experiential pilgrimage of peace next spring, modeling his proposed annual gathering. While the council debated release details in Charlotte, North Carolina, word of the Testament spread among global faith communities. Media outlets ran headlines proclaiming, "Graham's final vision revealed," and social commentators speculated about the extent of his private convictions. In seminaries from Oxford to Princeton, theological students pored over leaked passages, marveling that stadium crusades had concealed such intimate self-critique. Evangelical bloggers debated whether a shift from mass evangelism to grassroots mercy work signaled a paradigm change. Bishops hosted listening sessions in cathedral basements, inviting laypeople to reflect on the document's call to radical service. By contrast, some critics questioned the propriety of releasing private diaries and operational blueprints. Could these pages be sacrilegious, exposing strategies neither intended nor fully formed? Would revealing covert Cold War alliances undermine faith in the purity of religious motivations? The Advisory Council mitigated concern by redacting names of still-living operatives and adding explanatory notes about historical context. They emphasized that Graham had designated the material for future generations rather than immediate broadcast, and that responsible stewardship demanded both transparency and respect. Next, the council partnered with the Library of Congress to host a traveling exhibition titled Hidden Covenant: Billy Graham's Private Legacy. The exhibit opened in Washington, D.C., featuring original crates, recovered journals, and interactive modules that simulated opening Graham's secret study panel. Visitors could handle replica maps of relief convoy routes and watch dramatized readings of key Testament passages. Interfaith panels convened alongside the exhibit, forging dialogues on shared values across Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and Buddhism. Ticket proceeds funded humanitarian projects in Graham's name, bridging his spiritual vision with tangible mercy efforts. Simultaneously, the council refined the inaugural Pilgrimage of Peace. Set to convene 30 faith leaders at Lake Geneva's shores, it mirrored Graham's 1950 blueprint with updated agendas on refugee resettlement, climate justice, and nuclear disarmament. Participating clerics and civic leaders prepared opening statements inspired by the Testament. emphasizing unity beyond theological differences. Press releases highlighted that the event would forego grand auditoriums and megaphones, opting instead for small group worship and collaborative workshops. Faith communities worldwide pledged to host satellite gatherings in solidarity at AT Home. Grassroots ministries mobilized. Local churches launched Graham Service Days, volunteering at shelters, food banks, and community clinics. Medical missions in Haiti and Congo used his maps and convoy notes to plan distribution routes for emergency relief. University chaplaincies integrated the Testament into curricula on leadership ethics, challenging students to contemplate the tension between public acclaim and private conscience. A wave of new devotionals circulated, blending Graham's original sermons with fresh reflections on mercy and solidarity. By the time the documentary series, Beyond the Pulpit, premiered on public television, national conversations had shifted. Audiences discovered that Graham, often portrayed as a megachurch pioneer, had also been a tireless advocate for racial reconciliation and a discreet ally to persecuted believers behind the Iron Curtain. Reviews celebrated the series for unmasking a multidimensional leader whose private convictions reshaped public impact. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #Testament of Mercy and #Graham Legacy, inviting ordinary people to share how a single page from the Testament inspired acts of kindness in their neighborhoods. That the ripple effects of Graham's hidden study promise lasting transformation. His final words have become a rallying cry for leaders and lay people alike, urging a turn from rallies toward relationships, from eloquence to empathy, and from personal gain to shared sacrifice. Across continents, churches and nonprofits report a surge in volunteer registrations and charity donations directly tied to these revelations. In classrooms, boardrooms, and living rooms, conversations now pivot on compassion as an actionable mandate, fulfilling Graham's hidden covenant in real time.